Joining us with more on the immigration debate is Chris Kemalinsky. He's Deputy Director of Numbers USA. Chris, thanks for joining us. So all this talk about ripping immigrant children away from their parents. So what's the truth here?
Yeah, and what's sad is that while we're distracted with this issue that's going on in the border, the House is going to vote on two major immigration reform bills at the end of this week that nobody's talking about. But as for what's going on down on the border, what we've seen over the past couple of months is a surge of family units coming across, and really what it is it's folks from other countries that are trying to take advantage of our laws. Under the Obama administration, what would happen when family units cross the border is that they would keep the families together, and they would give them notice to appear in court at a future court date, and then they would just release them into the general population inside the United States, which is exactly what they want. Remember, they're crossing the border illegally. What the Trump administration is doing is they've announced a zero tolerance policy. And what that means is that anybody who is apprehended crossing the border illegally is going to be prosecuted. And while they're being prosecuted, they're going to hold them in custody. Well, under federal law, they're not allowed to hold children in federal custody. So they either have to release them, as the Obama administration did, or because of the zero tolerance policy, they detain the adults while they try to find temporary living quarters for the children. And that's what you're seeing down on the border is they're just following the process of the law. Again, this only pertains to folks that are caught crossing the border illegally in these family units with the small children. The adults are kept in detention centers while the children are moved to centers that are run by Health and Human Services, which tend to, they're not a detention facility. So, in the transportation process, some of the images that we've seen haven't looked too good. But again, that's when the minors are held again in a detention center for just a couple of hours, maybe 24 hours, maybe even 48 hours before they're eventually transferred and a spot is opened up in one of the better centers that's being run by Health and Human Services.
It seems there's a lot of outrage about this, but I know here in the United States, if a single parent is arrested with their children, they're separated from their children when they're processed into the jail or into the prison.
Right.
Why is this any different?
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's something that this morning I was saying that if I have two children myself, if I were driving around under the influence, not that I would, but if I were caught driving around under the influence and I have my children in the car, the police would take me into custody and they would separate me from my children, and they would either return my children back to my wife and her home, or they would put them in a different facility until they could be picked up by family members. And essentially, that's what the Department of Homeland Security is doing here. They're putting the adult aliens that are apprehended at the border into a detention facility while they're awaiting prosecution, and they're putting the children into a different facility.
What is the president really doing here, Chris? It seems like he's sending a message to those who may want to bring their children and try to cross illegally, also put pressure on Congress. What do you think he's up to?
Yeah, that's exactly what he's doing. We've seen this spike in family units attempting to cross the border just in the last few years, and it was really at the tail end of the Obama administration. Prior to that, you didn't have this massive influx of family units attempting to cross the border illegally. And the reason for it is because, again, the Obama administration simply changed the way that they handled folks along the border. They implemented this catch and release policy where if they caught people and they were with small children, they would release them. I keep saying small children. I shouldn't say small children. I should just say minors. It's anybody under the age of 18. So it could be a 17-year-old with them. But what they did was they issued them a notice to appear in court at a later date and just released them into the United States. The Trump administration, and what that did was it caused this influx of the numbers over the years. We've seen an increase in the number of family units crossing the border since, because word has gotten back in their home countries, hey, if you cross the border illegally into the United States and you have somebody under the age of 18 with you, they're going to release you into the United States. You're not going to get put into a detention center. Trump is trying to end that and dissuade people from making the journey across Mexico and the illegal border crossing. And coming across our border illegally, they're trying to dissuade people from doing that by implementing this zero tolerance policy.
Now, I understand the president is also concerned about human trafficking, the trafficking of children. And a lot
Right.
of these kids that are coming with the adults can't even identify them as their kids. So, what about that? I know some people have advocated just immediately sending the parents with the children back across the border without processing. So, what should be done? What if they are actually trafficking children?
Yeah, and that's another situation that has come up, and what we know, because word again has gotten back throughout Central America and other places around the world, that if you at least for the last few years, if you attempted to cross the border as a family unit, you would get released. So word has gotten back, and the human smugglers have taken advantage of it as well. And they said, okay, we can get you into the United States. We're just going to pair you up with a minor in order to accomplish that. And now what you're seeing is you're seeing folks come across the border with minors. They don't know who they are, and that's been another controversial issue. DHS won't release the children to somebody unless they can prove that they're one of their guardians. And that has caused some angst among some folks, because the Obama administration would release the children in those cases where they would apprehend the adult that came with a minor. They would release the minors to maybe just an aunt or an uncle or a distant cousin or something like that. The Trump administration has said, we're not going to do that. We're only going to release them to guardians, which means they may be holding the children in a facility for a longer period of time.
That's always amazed me. I mean, to get a child out of a public school here in America, you have to be a relative and show an ID and be on a list or something. But when it comes to crossing our border illegally, anybody could take the child. Well, so how
Right.
likely, Chris, are we to get a new immigration policy before the midterm election?
Yeah, like I said, that what this whole discussion, this whole border discussion is taking away from is a discussion about our current immigration process that, it issues more than 1 million green cards per year. And we still have this issue of illegal immigration into the United States as well. And there are going to be two votes on two separate proposals in the House of Representatives later this week. Unfortunately, nobody's really talking about either one of them.
Well, is the president likely to sign either one of them if they're approved?
He has said that if they get through both the House and Senate, he'll sign both, which is made for an interesting situation, because you have two bills that the president supports coming to the floor for a vote later on this week in the House, and both of them there are some stark differences between the two bills. But it doesn't look like either one, as of right now, has the votes to pass through the House, which means there's no way they're going to get through the Senate. If we get through the end of this week, they actually do have the vote on those two bills, and neither one of them gets through, then I think any chance for a vote on immigration legislation before the midterm elections is probably dead. And I think the next best chance to have some sort of action on immigration will be next spring, maybe, when the U.S. Supreme Court could end up taking up some of the DACA decisions that have been handed out by the lower courts.
So, Chris, it doesn't sound like you're very optimistic that we're going to have a new immigration policy. What happens if we don't have one by the end of November?
Well, it's just going to continue to be the status quo. Again, with our legal immigration system, we have 1 million people coming in every single year. That's mostly driven through the chain migration categories, which again, Numbers USA and a lot of folks and the president himself supports nuclear family immigration, which means that one person comes over, they're allowed to bring over their spouse and minor children, and they're not allowed to bring over their extended adult family members. That is currently allowed under our immigration system. President has called for an end to that and to chain migration. I doubt any of that will happen. The visa lottery will still remain in place, and none of the needed changes to close up some of these loopholes that are being exploited on the southern border, including this, this family units situation that's occurred. None of these things will be cleaned up in immigration law if nothing is passed and Congress doesn't pass anything in it. Like I said, if nothing happens by the end of this week, if nothing passes at the end of this week, then I don't think anything will get done. I think this will really be the last major crack at trying to reform the immigration system before the midterms.
It seems like each side's using this for political advantage, and in the meantime, nothing really gets done, does it?
Nope. And I couldn't agree more with you. The number of fundraising emails that have gone out from both sides, campaigns on both sides over the last couple of days, has been enormous.
Well, little willpower when it comes to tough political decisions. Chris Kemolensky of Numbers USA, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.